Is going to have the largest presentation of us all to really kind of set the stage, and then we'll bring Ronald, Hassan, and Greece, our agent, and Mark Bellis, the tourist are on, and they're going to give shorter pieces about what their organization is going to do. But a lot of what we talk about here is something that WWF has been doing in many sectors for a very long time. So therefore, we've asked Jim to really frame up what this issue is all about. So if you'll recall from yesterday morning, I showed these pieces where TUI Group is using certification as a means of verifying and validating sustainability claims for procurement. So we went through all this yesterday, and I shared this example. The Transat Canadian tour operator does a similar thing. And a key point I want to make here is that this model can be applied at any scale. And I think we need to think more broadly about procurement anyway and sustainability. And given hotels should really be working on its procurement. We talked about that somewhat this morning. Certainly Jillian was speaking about food sourcing and so forth. And I think as a community of sustainable tourism, I think we need to talk about procurement more often, more broadly. That's my big idea for today, is to think more about procurement. And then the one that's really been directly using the GSTC framework, as we've always envisioned it, this is the first case of this, was largely because of Jim and the partnership that he has, the WWF USA chapter with Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines. So it's a very important one to us. So having said all that, Jim, you could take it from here, and then we'll bring the others up to the panel a little bit later. We're going to stay in the audience so we can see the screen.
Thank you, Randy. So what I wanted to talk about today is public-private partnerships, and particularly our corporate partnerships. And one of the things that at least we're focused on with respect to the travel industry and industry in general is that the scale of the conservation challenges is such that as the population grows, and the number of people in the middle class grows, the consumption on all different dimensions really is that the amount of consumption that an increasing number of people are undertaking really is it's 1.6 times what is otherwise sustainable. And yet, as time marches along, this MIT study is showing that consumers are saying that sustainability is an issue of extreme concern. And one only needs to look at the U.S. With all the hurricanes and the wildfires that are occurring in California. And so this is also, one of our approaches in terms of affecting change across industry is to work with the biggest corporations on the planet. And you might think that what is a conservation organization working with McDonald's, Coca-Cola, or Cargill, which is one of the major commodity producers. But they're also recognizing that as this equation where consumers are growing and the consumption habits, that the commodities that they rely upon for their own businesses, they're finite. And so that is a cause for concern. And so corporate executives these days are recognizing that sustainability is important in their strategic plans and business plans. And that they also appreciate that collaborations are necessary to help ultimately improve their bottom line. And so WWF is actually working in all of these different areas, and we're seeking partnerships to basically advance our conservation goals in these areas. And so one of the things about WWF is that our network, we operate in 100 different countries. And roughly have about 6,000 employees in all of those countries. Again, one of the things that we recognize is if we're going to work with these companies, then they have to believe that we're a trusted partner, that we'd rather work with with them than fight them, in essence. And so this survey that was recently done among corporations is showing that if you're a McDonald's or a Walmart or whatever, that we're a trusted partner to work with. We'll try to be reasonable with you. And so WWF's approach in terms of working with corporate partners is to work holistically along these different dimensions: corporate philanthropy, consumer engagement, and sustainable business practices. And one of the elements of sustainable business practices is sourcing, supplier sourcing. And so in doing so, when you look at a big corporation like a Cargill or McDonald's, their supply chain is very large, and it goes all the way down to the commodities that are used for ultimately the products.
The mic is on.
Okay. Is that better? Oh,
Yeah.
That's better. Okay. And so this is what we look at in terms of the arc of the sustainability pathway for really any company, and looking at, first of all, doing an assessment, helping them with the business strategy, developing an implementation plan, and then also helping to develop a reporting framework to see what they're doing is working or not. And so in terms of the risk assessment, and with respect to suppliers, we're looking at all these dimensions, which are really, they're very similar in nature to many of the things that are in the GSTC criteria. And then also the UN SDGs as well. So in a case like Cargill, which again is oftentimes perceived as one of the big bad actors, these are some of the things that we're working with them. Beef is one of them, one of the issues. And it turns out that Cargill is supplying McDonald's and other fast food companies too. And so we're working with Cargill in terms of how they can produce more with having a lower footprint on the earth, and not only in the oceans and climate and food. One of the other big companies that we work is Unilever, and they're very much involved in fisheries. So in Walmart, we're working with them on emissions reductions in their stores, and particularly renewable energy. And you'll see in more and more Walmart stores, you'll see solar panels on top of the roofs. And again, many of these things, it makes sense for them because it increases their profitability, their lower energy costs, and that is one of the drivers, not only doing well by the environment, but also improving the bottom line. McDonald's, the other thing, and working with them is on packaging and increasingly migrating to FSC wood products in all their packaging. And again, sustainable sourcing of heat as well. Procter & Gamble, again, using FSC certified wood sources and also renewable energy. Google is another one of our big partners. If you think of their data warehouses, where they store a lot of our data, it uses a lot of energy. And so that is one of the things we're also working with them on various technologies. One of them that is pertinent to Africa is the wildlife technologies to combat poaching. So, and working with these companies, what is an important thing is that if you get a lot of the big companies, like the Cargills and the McDonald's and so forth, you begin to get a critical mass. And in the food space, if you can get the 10 or 20 top players in the food industry, then you begin to drag some of the others, companies, the smaller companies, to do similar sorts of things. And so one of these initiatives is in the climate space, where the Trump administration withdrew from the Paris Climate Accords. But many companies started jumping on board, cities, counties, states, and universities and so forth. And now the number of companies that have joined, who we are still in campaign, is over 2,700 companies. And there are companies, again, like Google, who are leading the way. And they're basically saying, okay, we're going to behave and act as though we are still belong. The U.S. Signed the Paris Accords. And so, again, in the tech space and online wildlife trafficking and online sales sites, Google also led the way to corral all these both U.S. and Chinese companies that are selling illegal wildlife products. And so, again, this is another example where you can get scammed. And so, getting to the travel industry, you probably all seen this slide a million times, but the growth of international travelers is the trajectory is such that, again, it gets back to this point of, as there's more travelers, and they're all consuming resources, and that's an issue on a number of different sustainability dimensions. And so when one looks at the supply chains, Ronald, you had another one of these slides yesterday. The travel industry is different than like cargo, which is dealing with commodities. The supply chain is incredibly complex. It has many different components to it. The orange bar is kind of all the steps where the traveler goes along. And then the dark green is all the different suppliers that are providing these services to the travelers. And then the light green are all the suppliers that are providing some of the ancillary services like the credit card companies, insurance companies, and so forth. And so as the number of travelers goes up in some of our most protected areas like Yosemite, where the visitation is 4 million people, or Siem Reap, which is, when I first went there, the visitation was about a couple thousand, and now it's about 2.5 million. You start to see not only on the consumption of resources, but also the impact on illegal wildlife. And in this case, this picture in Laos in the night market, where travelers are purchasing illegal ivory products. So when one looks at the travel industry, again, looking at the complexity of the supply chain, one can work on the people who are selling these tours and those travelers, of which there are going to be 1.9 billion, and affecting the behavior of all of those travelers. One can, but recognizing that to influence the behavior of 1.9 billion travelers, that's a daunting task. One can go another layer down into the supply chain and work with, let's say, hotels or safari camp providers. But still, that number is huge. But then one can look at some of the largest travel companies, the Airbnbs, the TripAdvisors, and so forth. Companies that are moving a lot of people, and again trying to get this critical mass of change at this level to ultimately pull the rest of the market. And also work with trade industries like the Travel Trade Association, which has roughly 1,300 members that specialize in that particular subsector. So some of these big players are like Ctrip in China, which is a big online booking engine with 300 million registered users. And so they were one of the partners that we're working on in terms of wildlife trafficking. And again, as I mentioned yesterday, for those of you who were in that session, in one campaign, we were able to reach ultimately 33 million travelers to talk about, to educate, to build awareness of wildlife trafficking. And then we're also working with tour operators like Intrepid. They handle about 300,000 travelers a year. They're the largest adventure travel company, and they're going to many of the areas where, for example, there's these intersection between conservation of wildlife and sustainable livelihoods. And so they're different in the sense that they measure their performance not only in terms of their financial performance, but also how their behavior and how their actions are influencing these the SDGs. And so, in all of their different operations, they're measuring how we're performing against the SDGs. And so, in the environment category and also social category, and also virtually all of the GSTC criteria, they're working on various initiatives that, again, they can measure. And in their new product development, they're looking at this holistic cycle of creating trips and touching upon all these different areas, recognizing that on the bottom left-hand corner, they have to be profitable to stay in business and affect change. So, and then that ultimately flows down. Again, the concept is you're working with the biggest companies, and you're ultimately influencing a lot of travelers. At the other end, and again, companies such as Intrepid are truly influencing the rest of the adventure travel sector. And so one of our big partnerships, also large partnerships, is with Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines. And this is a 5-year partnership that, again, is working on these 4 WWF goals: oceans, wildlife, climate, and food. And the 3 principal initiatives are reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And it's pretty amazing the things that they are doing, the technologies that they're doing. These new, even though you might think that a large cruise ship, the carbon footprint of a 6,500 passenger ship might be quite substantial, but on a per passenger basis, it's half of that of a smaller vessel, like a 100 passenger live-let vessel. And part of that is doing, because they have money to invest in innovation technologies such as new hull designs and paint on the hulls to reduce friction that's going through the water, which again ultimately saves them money in terms of fuel costs. Sustainable fisheries, they've committed to source 90% of their wild-caught seafood from MSC sources, and 75% of their farm-raised seafood that they serve on board their ships for 5 million passengers from ASC sources. And again, that affects the supply chain, because if they're buying from large suppliers, then the suppliers are getting the message is that if we want to do business with Royal Caribbean, then we have to supply MSC certified fish. In the sustainable tour arena, they have committed to endorse GSTC. Really kind of a landmark step in many respects, because no other large company has ever done this. And we're kind of we're kind of developing how we're going to do this for their 5 million plus passengers who are going ashore. They're taking shore excursions. They're working with over 500 tour operator suppliers, and they're saying to all these suppliers, their tour operators ranging from Abercrombie and Kent to a small tour operator that might have 10 employees. They're saying, we as part of our overall program to protect the oceans and the health of where we go to, and ultimately the quality of our travelers' experience, we want to take an approach that's based on good science, and that's where WWF comes into play, and integration and incorporation of our marine and coastal tourism strategy. And again, that's based on informed decision-making in terms of how we behave as a company. And again, using some of the certification standards that are already established. And so, again, looking at sustainable tours off on the top right-hand corner, they have made an initial commitment to source they offer roughly 6,000 shore excursions. Their first step was by 2020 to source, to offer 1,000 tours that are operated by GSTC certified tour operators. And so these are some of the targets that are associated with that. Again, endorse GSTC, educate the tour operators about GSTC, because many of them have frankly never heard of GSTC, about certification. And then here's the big thing that really is landmark, in my opinion. They created a preferential sourcing policy that is not unlike Home Depot sourcing FSC board products, or restaurants that are sourcing MSC certified seafood that they serve in their restaurants. And they created this preferential sourcing policy that when they put out their contracts for offering shore excursions to tour operators, they say you get more points, in essence, when you submit when we send out a tender or RFP, and if you submit a bid in addition to price and quality and safety and so forth, but if you're GSTC certified, then you rank above others, tour operators that may be submitting a bid as well. They further sweeten the deal by saying that if you become a GSTC certified tour operator, we'll give you a longer contract than somebody who is not. And so if you're a tour operator and you get an extra year on your contract, that is worth a lot of money. So again, this is the driver to create the right incentives to become certified. So they in turn, again, this is where the influence comes into play. They are making commitments in various aspects of the GSTC criteria. One is wildlife trafficking. And so they were first in terms of the cruise lines. A month later, Carnival signs a similar commitment. You then have 60% of the entire cruise market of the world. There's 450 roughly cruise ships around the world. And of all the passengers, you're getting 60% of the entire market. After Carnival signed, then CLIA jumped on board. And then after CLIA jumped on board, then the American Society of Travel Agents, ASTA, jumped on board. So again, this is a really good example of how one big player can influence the entire industry. And then after CLIA jumped on board, World Travel and Tourism Council jumped on board, and then there's ultimately over 100 of the largest travel companies that are now committed to combating wildlife trafficking. The last example I want to show is relative to food waste. And many people don't recognize that food waste is the #3 contributor to climate change. If you look at the rankings, it's also, in terms of opportunity, of the #3 area where one can really change behavior in terms of a solution to address climate change. So when you look at the travel industry, there's food service all touching every aspect of the travel industry. And so one of the things that WWF did was it partnered with, initially with the Rockefeller Foundation and the American Food and Lodging Association to develop a food waste toolkit. And then we ultimately said, well, how are we ever going to get this out to this toolkit to the travel industry? And so we worked ultimately with a South African hospitality training program called Lobster Inc. Many of you might have heard of this company. It's really kind of the cutting edge to deliver hospitality training for employees that are working in accommodations from everything from a safari camp. Wilderness Safari uses this training platform to Marriott Hotel. And so the Marriott Hotel Group with their 6,000 properties. And so an initial test was done. Highlighting this project was select hotels and camp owners and so forth. And in a 90-day period, all of these properties were able to reduce their food waste by 10%, which is significant. So again, just to wrap up, this is one approach. Obviously, there are operators big and small, suppliers big and small, but at least for WWF, we're trying to go after the biggest ones. So I'll leave it there and turn it over to Randy.
Yeah.
Good, thank you, Jim. So at this point, I'd ask our full panel, Mark, if you could come up too. You're up next. Anyone come and join? We've got our full panel up. Martin Vallis of TourCert is going to present next. This is working, I think, right? So you can walk around if you wish. Let me just make this comment that in addition to this theme of procurement, I think this presentation from Jim highlights also the fact that when we talk about sustainable tourism, sometimes people in the international tourism community in general, but in sustainable tourism, often just sort of think about something that's already highly sustainable. We're thinking about eco-lodges and this and that. But the work we're doing is about creating tools to make all forms of travel and tourism more sustainable, right? So the worst offenders are the most important ones to influence. And the tools that we've created, follow the GSTC criteria are for everyone. So it's just treating WWF's approach of just going to the largest producers and influence change in any way you can in all these sectors. So please, Martin, you can share with us what TourCert is doing in terms of organization.
So I'll just stick with that mic. Thank you very much for having invited me, and I feel very honored for being here. My name is Martin Balasch. I'm from Germany, and I'm representing TourCert. And in the next about 10 minutes, I would like to give you a short introduction of what TourCert is doing, and then I'd like to highlight 3 points that we found out in the last 10 years of experience in certifying mainly tour operators and other tourism businesses. First of all, I believe this conference shows that we as the sustainable tourism community are not only here to talk about the challenges of today, but also about the future topics we have to deal with in sustainability and tourism. And that's what I would like to highlight in the next 10 minutes. So what is TourCert? Not probably every one of you heard about us, but we are quite active in terms of sustainability certification in tourism. We've been founded in 2009, and we are a non-profit organization, which has been founded by different stakeholders of this tourism industry and also NGOs. Our headquarters is in Stuttgart. I'm working from Berlin, but we also have offices already in Cologne, Ecuador, Peru, and we have partners in Switzerland and Italy. We have several sets of criteria for tour operators, for hotels, but also for destinations and other tourism businesses. Our characteristics are 4 main points. First of all, we try to empower people, businesses, and employees who are working in the businesses for sustainable practices. We don't see our mission to go there and tell them what to do, but we actually want the people to implement the practices themselves, and we would like to advise them on this way. Also, we started from the first day of our organization to be as data-driven as possible. We try to measure many things, and I'll come to that a little bit later. And then another focus we're doing, of course, is the supply chain, as has been said before, which is very complex, but we have to deal with it, and our point of view is that when tackling the supply chain, this is one of the most important drivers of change. Another very important thing is that we can't just see how it is now, but we have to get on a path of continuous improvement, and this process actually is what we define as sustainable development in tourism. So it's not just about the actual status, but it's actually about the process, the improvement, and the speed of improvement. Well, the slide is a little bit messed up, but we have about 290 businesses in our community, and above that, we have about, or we checked about 3,000 tourism businesses all around the world in terms of sustainability. We also have about 300 businesses that are partners of the Sustainable Destinations we certify. And we also train many people in sustainability and qualify them as sustainability managers within their businesses. We also do a lot of trainings and seminars. As I said, our organization is spread out from many other institutions. For example, we work closely together with WWF Germany, that is also on our board of certification. Now I'd like to come to three main issues I think that in our point of view are very important. And the first thing we started off is, of course, with, I call it classic procurement or sourcing issues of tourism businesses. We put on some requirements for the businesses and try to keep them measuring and improving them. For example, we want the businesses to actually know how high is the percentage of sustainable and local procured products in the business. Another thing is, what about the business trips? Calculating the CO2 emissions of the business trips as well. It's quite important because why? Because then the leaders of the business actually also see what impacts they're having. Another thing is we try to encourage them getting green electricity in the office, calculate the CO2 emissions of the office. And one main thing, of course, is mapping also the environmental impacts of the business. We have a lot of service and checks for F&B services and sources. So, for example, hotel business can ask their procurement businesses to tell them how they're actually getting the food and the products they're then using. And for tour operators, what is very important to us, it has been said before this morning, is also when it comes to leakages. So all of our certified tour operators, they actually have to calculate the percentage of the price, the regular price for the tours that stays within the target market. So we try to encourage them to keep the leakages as slow as possible. Then what we found out is nice to have if you take care about the procurement within the business, but a way more important thing is to tackle the supply chain, especially when we talk about tour operators, because tour operators are the ones that are actually facing almost the whole tourist supply chain. They have also an influence on it, and they have the responsibility also on facing these issues. So we did already in 2009 start on doing things about it, mainly through digital evaluations and standardized evaluations. We try to encourage the businesses to get into contact with the suppliers, ask them of what can be improved, what can be done, and then work together, the tour operator and the suppliers, in terms of improving the services. So what we do is we provide surveys and checks which can easily be evaluated, and they are, as diagrams you can see actually how your performance is. Then we provide many trainings also to the suppliers, and we try to create a dialogue between the suppliers and in these terms create awareness raising. This is the first step. And then, of course, there needs to be a second step where we talk about supplier management, which is then clear standards and contracts as well. So we actually ask or demand the tour operators to implement supplier code of conduct for sustainable procurement, so that it is also set up through clear regulations and contracting. And another thing we also encourage them is to sign codes of human rights, such as the code by ECPAT. So we were quite successful with that in the last, or let's say in the first 5 to 8 years of business running. But we saw this is not the final step yet. Because now we have the tour operators that doing, trying to do procurement issues. They try to be in dialogue with the supply chain. But what is also very important if you talk about global tourism is to actually link the whole supply chain together. Because we found out most of the times tour operators don't know what is going on in the destinations, what sustainable practices are actually there. And on the other end, the businesses within the destinations, they don't really are in contact with others of the tourism supply chain, tour operators, for example. So we started quite some projects and put a lot of effort in linking the value chain. We started off in Latin America with quite a big project in 3 Latin American countries. We even won a prize for that of the German Tourism Association, which we are very proud of. And we are now really trying to focus on finding local partners and work together with these partners to qualify them and to link them to the source markets, to the sustainable practices in tourism. We try to build capacities and then, of course, also try to certify them. But this is not the first step because, first of all, of course, there needs to be a knowledge and qualification process. Then the last step, of course, would then be to market these sustainable travel offices. Well, see, this was some conclusion I wanted to say. What we found out in these projects is that there is actually a need for the businesses within the markets, and I think it's also here in Botswana and other countries here in Africa, that not just the businesses are the lone runners in sustainability practice, but that they also have good networks, good practices within the destination, and that the destination itself is committed to sustainability. Another thing we found out is that there's a high need of qualification, there's a high need of exchange between the businesses, and then there's also the need of taking the next step and marketing it, and also providing solutions for selling their products to the source markets. So that's what we actually found out in the last years, and this is kind of our 4th step now, or the experience we're having is that we see, as has been said before, there is a dynamic, but the dynamic is not enough yet. And we need to accelerate this dynamic in sustainability. And it's our responsibility as a certification body, but also it's a responsibility of many other stakeholders involved. So what we're doing right now is we try to establish solutions. We, of course, are still a certification body, but we see that as one certification body out of many others, we are not really able to accelerate this change. So we try to work together with others. We try to invite also other certification bodies to work together with us and to create one overall solution for sustainable practices. We create different platforms for that. For example, we would like to enlarge the sustainability community worldwide through certified businesses and also certification bodies. We would like to provide a bigger marketplace so that the linkage between supply chain and the source markets are even better. And we would like to, or we are already planning more services for joint marketing and purchasing. So what is also very important is the solutions for managing, for keep on measuring, and also maybe of consolidating data. As a sum up, I would like to say that we have to join forces, and we believe that only those projects will be successful that have actually a scalable business model, and that create very strong customer benefits. And we believe that these benefits can also be managed through measuring their impacts and also align their activities to the sustainable development goals to GSTC and other global activities in sustainability. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Come and join us over here. Excellent. It shows a very rich approach to kind of a comprehensive system of looking at supply chain development and procurement. Thank you very much. One quick comment on your classic list that you talked about the business executives of the travel companies in the road travel. Just some food for thought for the audience is that we have this vision, this dream that someday in the future, as this framework really matures for the travel and tourism industry, for buyers and sellers within the supply chain, we go externalize it to other industries. Just say to Siemens and Procter & Gamble, some of the largest companies in the world, that your internal travel policies should follow this. So this is another aspect that we're working towards. So on another scale of one locality, my good friend Ahmad Hassan from Green Star Egypt, if you're going to tell us what you're doing along these lines with your program in Egypt.
Hello. Hello, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers, GSTC and Botswana Tourism Organization, for hosting this session or this conference in general. I just want to point out the fact that I really appreciate the networking time offered. I don't see that much in conferences. I think the merit of the one-on-one discussion and the fact that you find out that there are other people in the world that are fighting the same battle you're fighting, it's good to touch hands with. So I come from Egypt, as Randy introduced me. I am an advisor to the Minister of Tourism, working on greening the tourism sector. So we created a unit called Green Tourism Unit. One of the products that we have is a Green Star Hotel, which is a certification program, and hence the relevance to this meeting. Before I get into what it is and where we are, I'd like to frame where Egypt tourism is. So for those of you who are not familiar with it, we have approximately 225,000 rooms of hospitality. We have very long stretches of beaches on the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. We used to be known for culture of tourism in the 60s and the 70s. Starting in the 80s, there has been a very strong migration towards beach tourism because of all the beach resorts that were created on the Red Sea. And that has resulted into the majority of the tourism activity becomes more of mass tourism. And therefore, we become subject to the influence of the tour operators. So that relationship needs to be underlined, that we do not enjoy a high command of how do you configure your source markets. We're influenced by tour operators. Then we'll get back to this point later. Okay, so it's a program that was really designed by a public-private partnership between GIZ, TUI, and two large investors in the tourism sector, Orasco and Travco, in case some of you heard of them. So they created this program to distinguish their set of hotels for their environmental consciousness. So it was purely for Egypt. It's not applicable outside the country. It has a set of criteria that covers these type of functions for sustainable environmental management, training, water, energy, waste, housekeeping, gardening, design, architecture, and so on and so forth. I don't want to spend a lot of time on the details, but rather on how this project can influence sustainable tourism in Egypt. So we have about 15 different destinations in Egypt where the program has footprint, about 80 hotels, and I don't like to focus on the number of hotels, I'd like to focus on the number of hospitality rooms. We have approximately 20,000 rooms that are classified green, and that's about 99% of our carrying capacity, which is not bad for a program this size. Dashboard, everybody talks about dashboard, and as I just mentioned, we have 80 hotels in 15 regions, 20,000 rooms. We pay less attention to the numbers and more on where this is headed in terms of sending out a message to the outside. And that message is really, we want to work with the international partners in different capacities. We understand that we're under the influence of tour operators. They come and dictate how many tourists will come to what destination in Egypt. And there was a question this morning from our fellow from Costa Rica that I asked him about the occupancy versus the number of hotels. We fall as victims for this because tour operators came to Egypt, encouraged everybody to build as many hotels as possible along the beach areas. Then the prices dropped down to $18 a night because everybody's competing to fill up their hotels. Not a situation where we want to be in. So we are trying to reach out to outsiders, and relevant to today's discussion, I think Randy beat me to it and talked about the sustainability plan of TUI, of by 2020 they will have 10 million green holidays. So they're looking for hotels that can accommodate 10 million around the world. So whatever that number that will come to Egypt, we have to have the proper capacity to offer it to them. And as I said, we only have 9% of our total capacity that's considered green. Other areas, of course, some of you might have heard of the Alliance, the Sustainable Tourism Certification Alliance Africa. It's an affiliation or a group of people trying to, in the infancy stage, try to create some commonality between different certification programs in the continent. We, a few years ago, went to Cape Town and WTM Africa and spoke with the Minister of Tourism in South Africa about creating a product called Cape to Cairo, tried to design a green trip from Cape Town to Cairo. Didn't go anywhere, but I'm just mentioning that these are the kind of issues a local program can do to expand its international recognition. This picture on the left-hand side is actually with TUI and a representative of Travel Life, which is no longer with Travel Life. But we are, again, another issue I'd like to mention, that there is room for cooperation between the different programs and the different service providers that will present the country in a certain form. Last but not least, our overall objective is to brand Egypt as a responsible destination with recognized environmental and social sensitivities to meet future demand. We believe that our future tourists are probably, if they are 10 or 15 years old now, they're much strong on social media and they're looking for forums to explain to them what Egypt is, more of an experience rather than a pyramid of things. We want to reduce our carbon footprint in support of Egypt's activities on climate change. We have a few tactics like global recognition. This is why we're here today. Even though we're a local program, we want to be able to link globally with like-minded. We want to expand the capacity. We want to green our norms. We're currently working in Egypt on new norms of what 3, 4, or 5 stars mean. We believe that our infrastructure has sort of deteriorated over time. We've had some political situations that left the sector floundering a little bit for about 6 or 7 years. So we woke up to find out that our infrastructure, which is the hardware of the business, we call our people the software of the business, and destinations and hotels and stuff are the hardware. They're not in the best of conditions. So we're revising our new norms, and we would like to plug some green standards into the new norms. I think I will move on to the end of this, and I want to say that in Egypt we would like to do everything differently. We don't like the way the SDGs were laid out. We want to make it look like a pyramid. That was true. So I thank you, and hope that.
Thank you very much. So there's a question for you on this, and I have to warn the audience, we're going to have very limited time for Q&A. So if you've got questions, give it a thought, please make it short and to the point. I have a question for you. In the 80 hotels you're working with, how much of it is really driven by these TUI traffic zone targets?
That's a good question. About maybe 38 or 37 are either... About 37 and a half. Yeah, less than 40 are owned or managed by TUI. And again, this project, this whole certification started with a lot of efforts from TUI and other investors. So they created this to distinguish themselves because they know they cater to the Western Hemisphere and a lot of Europeans. And as you said, the Sustainability Plan 2020. So they were basically preparing the ground for it.
But the point is the linkage between the buyers of hotels and those of you certified. So,
certainly.
Yeah.
Question here for Luigi.
Thank you very much. Just a very quick question for the WWF. I think it is very interesting and important that you push big organizations in finding certified products and certified suppliers. In my experience, I work a lot with MSC and MSC, and quite often these organizations, big, we have a discussion also with Royal Caribbean in Italy, don't know exactly how to check if the products are certified or not. Okay? It happens quite often that they believe that once the organization, the supplier, is certified, automatically all the products are certified. This is not feasible, this is not true. So I wonder, I would like to ask you if in your programs, do you explain also to these bigger players how to check carefully that what they are receiving is effectively MSC, FSC, or now GSTC certified? Because you know, for all these big standards, there is an official database, and there should be, I hope soon, also one for GSTC, so they can check first if the supplier is certified. It is not easy, because some people and some managers don't know how and where they can find out the certified suppliers. Once they qualify some suppliers, they don't know how to check that the products are certified.
Well, one of the roles. The whole monitoring and checking process, one of the things that, one of the value adds that we see with GSTC is that they have a process of accrediting certifying bodies, and they specify how the certifying bodies ultimately check if the suppliers and the tour operators are adhering to the criteria and the indicators. Same thing is true with MSC or FSC as well. The WWF is not involved in doing the checking, and we really rely upon ultimately those organizations like GSTC and MSC and FSC. There are certain other areas where, like greenhouse gas emissions is one of those areas where we ask the various tour players to be checked by a third party to see if they're meeting their mission targets. But a lot of that is driven by what kind of reporting systems that these companies have, and then ultimately checking if the numbers that they're putting in the reports are accurate. Other questions? Comments on Ronald, please. One of our founders.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the panel, and Jim, very inspired by your presentation, and I relate fully because I have seen other certification schemes in other sectors grow big time thanks to the partnerships and the commitment of intermediaries. You know, those middlemen and women in value chains that commit to a cause and can drive change significantly. The question is actually for all of us. How do we get more Royal Caribbeans on board? How do we get more Transats on board as a council, as a joint members of a council that in turn will mean better business for recognized and accredited certification programs that are working under the council? How do we get other companies, large companies, to recognize your program, TourCert, as a valid program that is driving change locally? How can we create a strategy to target those that we need to target and create that critical mass? I don't have an answer to that, but I would love to work together on finding a way to make that happen.
Please go ahead. Right. I think one of the best avenues is through trade associations. And a good example is the World Travel and Tourism Council. Their members are the actual CEOs of these large travel companies. And so if you can get the chairman of Marriott or Hilton to basically embrace like a food waste program, that, again, the whole peer pressure part of it comes into play. And again, if one of the things that we're trying to do at the next WTTC Summit is actually present a case study by one of the CEOs to say, this is not only good for the environment, it's good for our bottom line because we're saving money in food costs. And so that's one of the, I think one of the best ways is to go through organizations, trade associations, where they're already getting together. ATTA is another one, versus trying to do it from the ground up, let's say the GSTC.
And I would add to that we really couldn't do it in our past. We had to get the system in place. It's now the framework exists. We thank Jim and his team very deeply for this landmark moment of having Royal Caribbean use the framework in the manner in which we were always envisioning. And now we can deliver that message to everyone. I mean, we built it, it's tested, it's working, and so it can be applied. And I tried to make the point that it can be applied at any level. Any tour operator can use this as a way to source hotels, just the way the hotel should be sourcing local food. It's all the way up and down the scale, all sorts of sizes and shapes. We just have to get the word out. Sort of in our next phase of development too, and it's something we're going to put in our 2019 budget is a little bit of, as you know, we're very low resource, but start figuring out some ways to market the message and do that outreach, because we're at the moment in time when we can.
And one of the other issues is the confusion in the marketplace. Again, there are 390 travel ecosystems. So it's hard for all of those in the supply chain, it's hard for the consumers, to figure out, how to navigate this and understand, which certification schemes or which labels actually mean something in terms of changing not only company behavior, but traveler behavior.
Years ago, the state of Florida, the United States, created a program where they have a state agency that does green lodging certification. And the program failed because they let the certification get so lax that it was so meaningless. But today, the law still exists in the state of Florida that government agents are supposed to, when they travel overnight within the state of Florida, use from the green lodging. But it's meaningless because the certificate isn't strong. So here was an attempt, and my point of me sharing this is that to do this right, we have to get the entire framework right. It has to be credible. The certificates have to mean something. We need buy-in at all levels. And I hope you've gained some appreciation here in many of our topics that none of it's easy, but it's very important. And so after years of effort, we're getting there. So, Martin,
I would like to add on it. I totally agree. First of all, we as certification bodies, somehow we're also part of the problem. I totally agree, because there's so many of us. Also, we have to communicate in benefits. So what are the benefits for the bigger companies and corporations and associations in getting involved in this issue? And we have so many examples of success and failures. But somehow, we didn't learn on it. We have the same example as you just said in Germany. There was an umbrella certification label supposed to be established. It failed. Many attempts in collaborations of certification bodies failed. Of other practices. So we have to start learning from them and then join forces. We have the German Tourism Association. How are they now doing it? They kind of started a cooperation platform for all of their tour operators that want to be engaged in sustainability, and they just put together money. So it's not that each tour operator is investing in parallel projects, but they're investing one big bunch of money in one pilot project, and then they share all of the knowledge. It is also one solution.
So my main message here is we can market a credible system, and it's hard to market a system that lacks credibility. So it's all this, we'll always then, in our history, in our future, I should say, in our activities, we're going to be talking about rigor, competence, credibility, because that's going to drive the market to give the trust and faith to use this kind of scheme. So I'm sorry, quick comment, and we're past, and we're going to stop.
Not really relevant to the question, but our presence here today. I don't think sustainability is boring, as we heard this morning. I think the way we communicate it to the world can be boring. So it's on us to really make sure how to make it a little bit more attractive.
Good for you, I agree. Thank you all so much. Enjoy the networking. Thank you.